Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by the author of House on Fire, The Cage, Her Two, and the recent Shell Games. She is a former Philadelphia lawyer. She and her husband now live in Florida in the Blue Ridge Mountains, I guess simultaneously. We're going to talk more about how that works. That's right, it's your favorite writer of mine, Bonnie Kistler. Bonnie, how the heck are ya?
Good to see you, Robert. We first met in Asheville, and then we met in Nashville, and then we ran out of rhyming cities, so we have to meet on Zoom.
Yes, but you are forgetting Manhattanville because we did see each other at Thriller
Did meet
Fest.
in Manhattanville, so we've already broke the rhyming rule.
That's right. So you were kind enough to send me an advanced copy of your new book, Shell Games. I got a little bit, on deadline with something else, kind of got behind, but I'm like 100 pages in, really enjoying it. It's a very good read so far. And this just came out this week.
Yes, on Tuesday.
Let's talk. Obviously, before we get to this is kind of the whole reason we're here, but I want to always kind of go back and your first novel under your Bonnie Kistler name is House on Fire, but
Right.
now that is not your first novel ever, correct? So let's go back to way in the beginning. What was the very first thing that you did creatively? Do you remember?
The first novel that was published was in 1996, so I'm aging myself and my books there, called Breach of Trust. And I did three legal thrillers. Those were pure legal thrillers in sort of rapid succession, and then had a huge hiatus. I had a fourth book that didn't go anywhere. I went back to my law firm because Enron had just filed bankruptcy, and my law firm had a lot of fingers in a lot of different pies, and they needed my help. So I went back to my law firm and then just got sucked into it again for a decade. And it was years before I was able to pull myself away and get back to writing. And that's why the earlier books are written under my real name, my own birth name, Bonnie McDougall. When I sold House on Fire, the thinking was it was time to reboot. It had been too long since the previous books had been written, that this was House on Fire was less of a legal thriller, more of a domestic suspense kind of book, different subgenre. So they said, let's have a different name. So I started, thinking of all kinds of creative pseudonyms. And they're like, no, you have to have a real person's name because you have everybody's on social media now. You have to exist in the world. You can't just be, a pseudonymous. And they said, you do have another name, i.e., my married name. And so that's where Kistler came from. It was never my wish nor my husband's, frankly, that I write as Kistler, but that was sort of the consensus among the people who know better than I do, and that's where it's taken off.
Okay, well, I definitely want to get back to, the whole transition into the different name. So the very first novel in 96, was that the first novel that you had written or the first novel that got published?
It got published. I wrote from the time I was a kid. I wrote uh, I wrote a novel when I was in college and sent it off to Harper, which was then still called Harper and Row. It was so long ago. And no agent. I just sent it, and of course they sent it back by return mail. Nothing came of that. It wasn't any good. And I still was spent all my time in college. I was an English major, specializing in the novel, and all I wanted to do in college was read novels and write novels. I didn't take any other classes. I didn't avail myself of any of the pure benefits of a liberal arts education, which I do regret a little in hindsight. But then I got just a real dose of reality, thinking I'm not gonna be able to earn a living at what I'm doing now, and I want to be self-supporting. And so I decided to go to law school, which is, there's not that many options open to English majors. And it seemed like a good thing for somebody, who liked the use of language, who liked to argue, who liked to persuade. Let me say not argue, but persuade. So I went to law school, immediately got sucked into the big city, big law firm world of high stakes litigation. And that's what I did for a couple decades.
So as a kid, though, you said you were writing when you were a kid. What was it about, like how did that come about? Because, not a lot of, I mean, obviously a lot of writers that I talk to were writing when they were kids, but most kids are not writing. So what was going on that really gave you that push to want to, I guess, were you telling stories? Were you doing poems, or what specifically were you doing?
I was telling stories. I actually I recently ran into an old neighbor, childhood friend, who said, "Do you remember how you would sit on your front porch and all the neighborhood kids would sit cross-legged at your feet and you would tell stories?" And I had actually forgotten that, but I would do that. I would just entertain the troops, the neighborhood gangs of kids by telling stories, and I would just make it up as I went. But then I wanted to get a little bit more disciplined and polished, and so I started writing the stories. And I can remember in seventh grade asking the teacher if I could do a book report, because we were assigned a book report. I said, "Could I do a book report on a book that I wrote myself?" And she was like, "No, but come see me after class and we'll talk about this some more." So yeah, I wrote as a kid.
So what were you doing? Like, did you do any like short stories? Or like, had you published anything, I guess, prior to Breach of Trust?
No, I don't even remember ever writing a short story. I think I wrote some novellas only because I didn't have enough, gumption in me as a young person to write a full-length novel. But short stories never. And I remember, Robert, you're talking about flash fiction and doing the 25 words fiction, which I think is a real art to be able to convey, a whole brunt of a story in such short. But I've always felt like I needed a bigger canvas, and I always thought of a short story as being a snapshot and a novel being a feature film, or these days, an 8 episode limited series. The having the room to really tell a story and really, get into all the nuances of it. So no, I never wrote short stories, and I never published anything before Breach of Trust. Not even, magazine articles.
So what were you like? What were you like? Who were you reading at that time that really, I mean, was there inspiration, any authors or any books in particular that really gave you the push to feel like this was something that you wanted to do and you felt that you could do?
I always read the classics. I was just really big as a kid in reading, Victor Hugo, and I did a whole summer of doing nothing but William Faulkner. None of those people were an inspiration to me because obviously I don't pretend to write anything anywhere close to that. But I think that it just immersed me in language and the idea of just writing my own stories. So no, there was nobody that I modeled myself after. Of course, I read all the Brontes were always big with me. Charles Dickens. I actually suffered a bit from liking Charles Dickens too much because a lot of my early rejected manuscripts were kind of Dickensian in that there was a cast of thousands and they went on and on and on and on, and everybody said, "This is too long. You're not writing for a modern audience." And I had to back myself away from that kind of very long form writing, and keep. I still do today. I still have to remind myself to cut here and cut here and streamline here, because I think the modern audience wants a faster read. You see this all the time in reviews. You can read it in a single sitting. It has short chapters. All this kind of stuff. Whether it's a function of us all being wedded to our phones and digital content or whatever, but I think the attention span today demands a more streamlined book than what I was writing in my earliest, rejected days.
So with Breach of Trust, that was your first published novel. This came out and you said it was in 96. You were working as a lawyer at that time?
uh, up until publication. I had a good enough deal that I could leave my law firm at that point, and I did.
Okay.
And so
Wow, great. Yeah, I mean,
several,
publishing was much different back in the 90s, I guess, than it is now.
there were much bigger advances in those days.
Yeah.
True.
Um, so so you don't already know like how many other books you had written before Breach of Trust was published, do you? Like what number
And
novel that was?
maybe 8 or 10.
And at that point, was that through an agent? Like you had gotten an agent previously and that was shopped around?
No,
Okay, it
these were
wasn't.
books I never even queried about. They were all just trial and mostly error. It wasn't until breach of trust that I went out looking, and got
Right.
an agent.
So with breach of trust, you went and you tried to, and you got an agent, and then that was shopped around in that way. So okay, and then so you wrote those novels, and then how many novels did you write under your, I guess, your maiden name?
Yeah. Three.
Three. Okay. And then you said you kind of took a little bit of a, was a sabbatical, or like what was the reason? Just because publishing being publishing?
I'm sorry, what?
I like
Why?
like what was the
Why
that
did I?
after that third book, what happened? Because you said there was like a lot of,
Oh,
a
yes,
lot
I
of
wrote a
time in
fourth one.
between.
I wrote a fourth one that did not sell.
Hmm.
Has not sold to this day. Of course, I haven't tried since then, but it didn't sell. Uh, and I did something that I advise all aspiring writers and early stage writers today not to do. Don't follow my example. I gave up. I just thought, well, this is obviously not working for me because, I published three, but now the fourth doesn't sell. And meanwhile, I had children who needed to be educated, and my law firm was asking me to come back. And I thought, okay, that was that. It was nice. It was a fun little thing I always wanted to do. And now I'm back to, putting my nose to the grindstone. But obviously I still wanted to write. I couldn't shed the desire to write, and I would steal away moments whenever I could, which wasn't too often. But finally, and in fact, I remember my agent at the time, calling me and saying, "When are you ever going to send something new?" And I said, I just don't have time. And she said, "Bonnie, make time." And so I thought, yeah, I need to do this. So I did.
And is that how House on Fire became about, or was there another book in between?
It was House on Fire, and it took a while though. I mean, I left my law firm. We moved out of Philadelphia. I thought I really need to get away from this environment because it's too likely it's like The Godfather. It's going to suck me back in. Every time I get away, they pull me back in. So we moved then to Asheville and Sarasota, and took some time to sort of get my feet established as a non-lawyer and a full-time writer, but then wrote House on Fire, and same agent, same.
And so you shop that around under, I guess, the original name you said. And so the publisher, I mean, so for people who aren't aware, well, mostly for writers who aren't aware, because I don't think this is something that people really are think about too much at the time. But I mean, the sales just, your sales track record follows you regardless of even if it's been a decade or two. I mean, I know some writers will say like, well, after a certain amount of time, it doesn't really matter anymore. You kind of like start fresh. But I mean, so like, did you run into any of that when you were
Actually,
shopping this
now
around?
I'm recalling now, it was actually my agent first, who, after she said she loved House on Fire, she said, BookScan has your numbers from back in the 90s, and they don't mean it. They're not valid numbers. They don't really mean anything, but everybody's going to look at those numbers before they consider making an offer on this book. So it was actually my agent who first said, let's have a different name. And then
Okay.
when we did sell House on Fire, it was with somebody who had published me as Bonnie McDougall. And so my agent felt that she needed to then go and disclose that this is in fact a person you know. And they were like, well, we knew this was not a debut novel. We figured something else was going on here. And how wonderful to meet Bonnie again. But we agree, let's use a different name.
Okay. Cool.
So that
Um,
was, yeah, that all came about.
and then obviously your second book under the newer name was The Cage, which um, would you say, I guess, would be considered more of the your breakout book so far? Like that one
Yeah.
was kind of the biggest one so far.
So far before Shell Games, looks like Shell
Before
Games
Shell
took.
Games, yeah, fingers crossed with Shell Games. Shell Games just came out. Hopefully that
Yeah,
one
yeah.
does. But so, and then the,
Today,
the interesting thing
it's sales.
about The Cage is, can you kind of talk about like, well, first of all, you said that these are a little bit different books than what the McDougall books had been. So like what about these would you say are different?
Actually, that was true of House on Fire, which was very much a domestic family centered drama, although the lead character was a female lawyer, but it wasn't as nearly a legal thriller like my previous McDougall titles had been. But The Cage is more of a true legal thriller. They still call it psychological thriller because I think legal thrillers have fallen a little bit out of favor. Uh, but it is a young female lawyer working for the law department of a big international fashion conglomerate and dealing not with, well, there's a murder or a suicide at the very beginning of the book, and it's what falls out from there. So it's not dealing with a law case that she's handling or anything like that, but it's in that law environment. And the major players are lawyers and cops.
Um, do you find yourself just like outlining it all, or do you just sit down and with an idea or character and just go from there?
Somewhere in between those two. I don't
Has that
outline it.
changed through the years, or I guess has your writing process or style at all evolved from what it had been, at this point, 20, 30 years ago, or
Oh, it's
has mostly just kind of been the same?
been the same. I always start with my opening premise, my what if question. What if this, what if this, what if that? And I know where I want to end up. And I know a few of the benchmarks along the way, a few of the set pieces that I think would work to carry this story, but I don't know how I'm connecting, the dots all the way through. And I don't outline scenes. I don't plot it out at all. I start and I just try to aim toward, that first benchmark, knowing that I've got the finish line that I have to figure out how to get there. And I come up with a lot of the ideas just along the way. And I surprise myself sometimes. And I like surprising myself because I think that I get bored very easily. And it takes me a long time to write a book. It takes me a year, sometimes more. And if I had a scene by scene outline and already knew everything that was going to happen, I think I'd be so bored with my own material that I might just abandon it. Whereas when I still know that there's a surprise waiting for me, I think that keeps me more engaged. And then I hope my readers more engaged.
Do you have an idea of what the ending is going to be, or what could be? I mean, do you at least have like kind of an end goal in sight, or is it mostly just we'll see what happens?
No, no, it's definitely an end goal. I've got a target and I'm aiming for that target. Um, Sometimes I know the exact final scene, even though I don't know, still, as I said, I don't know how I'm getting there necessarily, but I've got that final scene in mind.
So what are your writing days typically like? You said it usually takes about a year to work. Now, is a year to work on just like a complete draft, or is that including just the whole editorial process, the copy editing, and everything else?
Uh, I don't really do a first draft.
Okay.
I pretty much I edit as I go. So by the time I've actually, written the last page, it's kind of done and ready to go off to my agent. And then I'll get some notes, and I'll do some revisions then. But I don't I definitely don't do that thing that they call vomit drafting, where you just get everything out on the page and then see what you've got. And that old adage about, you can't edit a blank page. It's better to have something down than nothing. That really doesn't work for me, because if it's garbage and I look at it and it's garbage, again, I get disgusted with myself and I abandon the project. I've abandoned many projects where when I went back and read what I wrote, it was so bad that I just wasn't going to pursue it anymore. So I don't believe in that idea of just put words on the page. I don't put the words on the page until I like the words, until I think these are the right words. And so I do not have any discipline at all when it comes to writing. I don't have word limits per day. I don't have hours per day that I have to sit and write. I write when I have the words, and I'll do something else if I don't have them. I'll go for a long walk. I'll go for a run. I'll go swim. I'll go garden. And then I'm thinking about it the whole time. And then I say, yeah, that's the way that should work. And then I'll go run back to the computer and do it. But that's, partly why it takes me a long time.
Yeah, I think it was Walter Mosley said something along the lines of, writing is not just is not just sitting at the keyboard writing. I mean, there's a whole other process. It's even if you think about the, if you throughout the day thinking about the characters, thinking about the story, thinking about the book, that is still, maybe
That
not
counts as writing.
technically writing, but it's still working. It's still working on the
Yeah.
book. So when you do those sit down, is it mostly just at like a scene at a time, a chapter? Do you try to like at least get, I mean, specifically if you're not really, like you said, you're not trying to like hit a certain goal each day of word count or chapters. I mean, what is it that you are, at what point then do you know, okay, this is done then for today?
When I don't have any more words. I know I don't. I mean, I normally, this is the scene. This is what I want to happen in the scene, and now I'm thinking about the words that I need to have. This is how I should express it. I will usually try to finish the scene, but I don't require myself to. And if I come to a point where I'm not sure I really know what the right light and tone is of this next part, I'll just step away from it. I just walk away. I don't force myself to finish the scene.
Um, we're gonna get the shell games in a little bit. I did want to check real quick in terms of your other books. Are you so shell games is written in third person, past tense, and I think the cages as well, her too. Like, I don't know, like is that the comfortable what was it? You just like comfortable like point of view and tense for you, or like have you ever experimented with different points of view or different tenses?
I don't like present tense. I think in most cases it feels like an affectation to me, something writers do to try to make something seem more immediate and thrilling than it might otherwise be if they use past tense. I mean, we're telling stories. By definition, it's already happened. It's in the past. So I always use past tense. I never use present tense. I do occasionally use first person. In The Cage, I alternated between first person for Shay's story, she's telling her part, and third person for the rest of the story. But my normal default is past tense, third person, close third, usually close third.
And speaking of the cage, it looks like is it the UK version has a different title, correct?
Yes, they called it 7 minutes later. And there's a funny story about that, which is embarrassing for me, which is they told me that it was going to be 7 minutes later. And it's the opening scene is these two women are in an elevator late on a Sunday night. They've both been working late. And the elevator breaks down. And it's 2 hours before fire squad comes and rescues them. By the time they come and rescue them, they open the elevator doors, and one of the women is dead of a gunshot wound. And the question that rides out throughout the whole novel is, did the survivor kill her? And if so, why? Or, as she claims, the dead woman had a panic attack in the dark, airless elevator, and she had the gun, pulled it out, and killed herself in her panic attack. And you have to figure out which is going on there. Now I've forgotten where I was going. What your question was, where I
It
was
was
going with
there was the UK
later, 7
title
minutes
that
later. So they said they didn't want to call it The Cage. They wanted to call it 7 minutes later. And I said, but it was 2 hours later. What are you talking about? And they had to show me where in the story it was 7 minutes before the survivor called 911 in the elevator, 7 minutes from the time the power went out until she called. And so that was the 7 minutes that they were referring to. And it hadn't been important to me, those 7 minutes. So I didn't understand it, but it works. And that's why I was embarrassed. I have to have my own words pointed out to me.
and then are you able to talk anything because you said because I think I saw in the was it Jeff Circle's dossier um the cage is that currently in development or is that pre-development right now?
It's in development, but it hasn't found a platform yet. There's still, I mean, the studio and the production company are all over it. The script's been written and it's tremendous. The whole package is ready to go, but they are still weighing streaming options.
And are you involved at all as like an EP or any type of thing, like consulting? Like, are you seeing any of the
If
scripts?
I've seen the scripts, yeah. If and when it actually happens, I will be credited as an executive producer.
Oh,
But
very cool.
I'm not involved in the development phase at all.
Yeah. Um, so all right, so let's talk about Shell Games. This is the most recent book, just came out. Like I said, I've been very busy with some projects, so I'm only about 110 pages in, really enjoying it. And recently you were interviewed by Scott Simon, you said, mostly because well, can you talk about like, well, first of all, tell people who aren't aware, do the pitch, kind of tell us what the book's about, and we'll go from there.
Uh, the book opens on the wedding night of an elderly couple, 70-year-old woman who is a Florida real estate developer, self-made millionaire, power broker, etc., who marries her long lost high school sweetheart, who's a salt of the earth guy with no money of his own. And in their honeymoon suite, uh, she calls the police in hysterics, claiming that Charlie, her husband, has just confessed that he was the Tylenol killer back in 1982. And immediately, everybody's alarmed. The police come, they pull records, they investigate, and establish that Charlie couldn't have been the Tylenol killer. He was a Marine station in Lebanon at the time. And Charlie says that he never confessed any such thing to her, that she'd had too much wedding champagne and she'll be fine in the morning. But, she just, and when Kate realizes that he could not have committed the crime, according to the FBI, she decides that what he's done is because he did in fact confess, she's certain of it, she insists that, but she says he must be gaslighting her. He's trying to make people think that she's crazy so that he can get her committed and thereby get around the prenup and get control of her vast fortune. And the story is actually her daughter's story, the daughter who's a married woman of her own, young woman. And she is the one sort of has to decide, which is happening here. Is her brilliant mother losing her mind, or is her beloved new stepfather playing a long con game here? So the Tylenol murders are this plot point in the book. And this was I've noticed that a lot of people, especially younger people, don't know anything about it. So it does
No,
bear.
I thought yeah, I thought it was something that you made up for the story. I did not
Oh
know
my
it was actually
goodness,
based on a real
you're
thing.
so young, you didn't know. In 1982, someone went into a bunch of retail stores in the Chicago area, removed bottles of extra strength Tylenol from the shelves. And in those days, they just opened. There was no tamper-proof packaging. And they had those capsules that you could take apart with little powder inside, and they replaced the medicine with potassium cyanide. And people, unsuspecting consumers, purchased these bottles on the shelf with no indication that it had been tampered with, took them home, took them, took the pills, and died. Died very painful, horrible deaths. 7 people. And so there was an immediate nationwide recall of every bottle of Tylenol. They had trucks with loudspeakers driving through the streets of Chicago, getting people to round up their Tylenol bottles. And the interesting thing is that the food and drug industry went into a tailspin, thinking that nobody's going to buy our products anymore if they think that they can just be so easily tampered. So they had summit meetings to decide what are we going to do. And the FDA immediately got involved and very quickly promulgated regulations requiring what we all deal with today, which is those blister packs, the foil seals, the arrows that you have to line up to flip off. That's all as a result of the Tylenol murders. And Scott Simon, who was the host of Weekend Edition on NPR, was a reporter in Chicago in the 80s, and he said he filed a couple stories on this. And so when he saw that this was a plot point in Shell Games, he was intrigued, and he read the book and loved it and decided to have me on his show. And so I was on last weekend, Saturday. But then he wanted to talk more about it, so he had me on his Zoom broadcast that he does. He has a program he calls Open Book that he does on Twitter, on the Twitter platform. And so we did that the other night too. But it was
So
all just this Tylenol connection.
So when you came up with the idea for this book, had you always known you wanted to use the Tylenol murders as that thing in the past, or like how did that come about that you decided to use that?
Okay, this is a bizarre story, which is
I love bizarre stories. Perfect.
very much out of character for me, because most of my stories are, inspired by real life events, ripped from the headlines, all that stuff. This one literally was a dream. I had a dream in which I was a bride on my wedding night, and my husband, my brand new husband, told me he was the Tylenol murderer. So the Tylenol thing was plugged in from the very beginning. In the dream, I freak out when he tells me this, and I run out of our honeymoon suite to the nearest police station to report what I've just this horrible thing I've just learned. And my husband comes running in after me and shaking his head sadly at the police. He says she's having another one of her episodes. And I've been wanting to do something about gaslighting, which is a concept of, the psychological manipulation that I think is fascinating. And obviously that's what he was doing in this dream. And when I woke up, I thought two things. One, thank goodness that wasn't my real life husband in the dream. And two, there's my gaslighting story. And so it honestly came to me in a dream. So the Tylenol bit was part of it from the start.
And so after you had that dream, were you a little bit still pissed off at your husband, like kind of giving him the cold shoulder, and you didn't really know why, or I don't know, how'd that go about?
No, I was grateful to him for not being the bridegroom in the story.
So,
Because
I mean, I don't know if I guess it's not really. I mean, this is so the Tylenol murders happened. I guess anybody who Googles it or looks in Wikipedia is gonna know the answer. I don't really know if this affects the book any. I mean, like you said, we know that obviously the her husband is not the actual killer because he has an alibi. Did they ever determine who in real life?
they identified a prime suspect. And this was an interesting wrinkle in the case. Shortly after the murders happened, Johnson and Johnson, the manufacturer, got a letter, an extortion demand, saying the killings will stop if you give me $1 million. And they were able to trace it to the author of this letter, a man named I think his name was James Lewis, and he was convicted and served time for extortion. They always thought he must have been the actual killer as well, but they could never prove that he was in Chicago on any of the dates in question when the tampering happened. And the police were hot on his heels, but the prosecutors were like, it's too circumstantial. We can't take this to court. So they never did. And in fact, he died last summer, never having been charged for these murders. And officially, the cases are still unsolved and open, but the assumption was that he was the guy. But his explanation, I guess his lawyer's explanation was it was an opportunistic money grab. These things had happened. He read about it. He thought, here's a chance to get Johnson and Johnson to give me $1 million without having done the crimes himself. And that was, that would have been his argument to the jury had he been tried. So.
And so in the book, when the FBI does their investigation on her husband on Charlie, the FBI agent does say to Julie, basically, we think we know who did it. Like that's what you're talking about, the person that they just
Yeah,
never really could. Okay, very
yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
Huh. So, so was this one? Okay, so you had a dream. You had basically the setup for the story. Did you know though when you started writing it how you were, what the ending was going to be, or was this a case of just still? I mean, were there any, did you have surprises along the way?
I did have a lot of surprises along the way, but not with respect to that basic plot, the main arc of the story. I knew how that was going to end. But I didn't know a lot of other stuff. And there were some other characters. Julie has a husband who's a little suspect, and there's some stuff going on there, and there's stuff going on with the mother's real estate company, and I developed all that as I went. Came up with new characters as I was into the story. I decided I was already pretty far in when I decided that there should be something about climate change in this story. It's something that's affecting the globe worldwide, but Florida, I think, really brings a lot of it to bear. It seems so evident there, where the last 20 years have just seen both coasts of that peninsula being paved over, and with high rises going up, and the destruction of the natural environment. So I decided to bring in a climate activist as a character and have him interact with Julie and see where that went. So that was all stuff that just came to me as I was writing.
Did you always know that the setting was going to be Florida? Because I believe your other, I think like the Cage was the Cage in Philadelphia, or
Cage
was
is in New
it
York,
New
New
York?
York
Okay,
Fashion
New York.
Week,
But I mean,
and
like I guess like
Fire.
when you come up with some of these ideas for your books, how much does the setting really play into? I mean, obviously with shell games, I mean, you're dealing with a hurricane. I mean, there's like a lot of stuff like really, Florida would have to make sense. But I mean, I don't know. Like, did you know from the very beginning this was going to be a Florida novel?
This was, yeah, I intended this to be a Florida story. Uh, well, I don't, the whole Tylenol thing came first, but then I thought, yeah, this will be my Florida story. I've been a part-time resident of Florida for more than 20 years, but it felt like I finally had the right to write about it. Like coming in as a northerner, outsider into this community. I couldn't be Carl Hyacin and claim to have a right to this land. But after 20 years, I thought, I think I've got my finger on the pulse of at least this aspect of this part of the population of Florida that I can write it pretty well. So Florida, setting it in Florida was important to this story. My other novels, setting's always important, but it's a little bit more fungible. For example, in House on Fire, I started out writing that in Philadelphia, which is where I'm from, and seemed like an easy story there. It involved suburban couple with kind of horse country, very much the environment I grew up in and lived in suburban Philadelphia. But then as I was into the story, this was another thing that came after I had the main outline of the story. A subplot involved uh, a foreign ambassador whose wife wanted to divorce him here in Washington, and there's some interesting legal issues there that I won't go into now, but how he could use his diplomatic immunity to evade, the basic rules of divorce and property settlement, et cetera. And I just got really interested in that. And I thought, well, now, okay, we have to move it to Washington. So I took my Philadelphia lawyer and made her a Washington lawyer living in suburban Virginia and in, horse country in Virginia. So it was important, but it was more fungible. I could move it around. And then her too is about a lawyer who's a very high powered defense attorney, and she goes everywhere because she, the rich clients call her and she goes wherever the big cases take her. And so that was all through the whole Eastern Seaboard. She goes from, Washington to Philadelphia to New York to Boston. And it's just the whole Acela train route is where that book takes place.
So when you're writing a book like Shell Games, I don't know. It's always interesting with some authors when they do the settings in actual real places where I'm trying to remember like the town that like the town where like her mansion is that like a real place, or is this kind of like you kind of fictionalized a little like area, or like like how much is the real Florida versus you kind of created different things to not have to deal with people being like, there's no stop sign on that street type stuff.
Yeah, a hybrid, a mix of that, because the parts of the story that take place in downtown Sarasota, it's absolutely downtown Sarasota, all the way down to a Starbucks where there's a conversation that takes place at a Starbucks. It's very clear exactly what corner that's on. But the mansion is on a made-up island, a barrier island off the coast of Sarasota County, and I named it Coquina. It was very clearly based on an island called Casey Key, which is a very ritzy island there. Stephen King has a house there. Billionaires inhabit this island, but it didn't quite look exactly the way I wanted it to. So I decided I'm not going to make it Casey Key. I'm going to make it clearly modeled after Casey Key, but it's going to be this made up name. The streets just, didn't go exactly where I wanted them to. The mansions didn't sit exactly where I wanted them to. So I made up a new island.
When you start a new book, do you typically have an idea of how, like, how many pages it will probably be, how many words? Because this one is like 80,000 something, correct? And I
I
think
think
without out of all of your Kistler books, this is probably your shortest, correct?
I didn't realize that. I, I mean, that
So
maybe, but
so if there's on for people, and I always kind of mention this, Kobo.com. If you go on Kobo.com and look up the ebooks, probably 99% of the time it'll actually tell you how many words each ebook is. And so that's how I know because I believe like The
yeah,
Cage, The House on Fire, like I think over 100,000. Actually, I think House on Fire is your longest so far
yeah,
under the Kistler name, correct?
yeah.
And so that's how, again, I saw that Shell Games was like 80 something. I don't know. Maybe it was closer to 90. But yeah, I mean, do you typically know when you start, you're like in your gut, do you kind of have a feeling like, okay, this is probably going to be X amount, or are there times where you think it's going to be this and then becomes longer or shorter?
No, I don't have any idea other than because I've been told in the past that I'm too wordy, that I have too much Charles Dickens in me. I'm very aware of the fact that I can't be as long as I want to be, that I have to streamline this. And I think, as I was saying in the earlier part of our conversation, being aware of how people's attention spans seem a little not as firm, that I think as the years have gone by, I'm much more likely. And so I'm not surprised that you told me that Shell Games is my shortest novel. I think because I've just become more aware of that as the years go by, and as I get more and more reader feedback. This thing I see all the time now, which honestly had never seemed important to me before, but you see it in reviews all the time. You say, I love it. It had short chapters. The short chapters seem to be very important to people, in this genre, at least. And it's partly, that they can stop. They feel like they can stop. Apparently people didn't realize you could stop in the middle of a chapter. They felt they had to be at the end of a chapter before they could stop.
It is tough to stop in the middle of a chapter. I will say the Shell Games has 46 chapters to it, so that's if we're looking at, you're averaging what, 1,500 words, about 2,000, you know what I mean? I guess on average, which is still, I guess, short chapters, but it's not like a Patterson like 100
Yeah,
100 chapter type thing. Um, so when you say being wordy, like do you because you said that you edit as you go along. So when you're writing a chapter or a scene or whatever else, I mean, I guess like how do you kind of deal with that idea about being wordy? I mean, how much do you like when you go back through, I guess, doing your editing, like what are you pulling out or what are you trying to tighten?
yeah. Actually, wordy was probably the wrong word to use because I don't do like big descriptions. I don't stop and have an aside for a page describing what the sunset looks. I'm not that kind of wordiness. I tend to have like too many plots going and
Mm.
too many I can't just have in my early efforts, I will, feel like I have to explain everything, like how if these two characters are here, well, how did they get there? And I can't just say, okay, well, they're there now. So when I edit as I go, I will take out those kind of, the readers do not need to know how they got into the room. We can skip this part, just get them into the room, that kind of stuff. And that's how I attempt to, be less wordy or less plot, cluttered. Cluttered is a better word than wordy. Is cluttered.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with Jordan Harper recently, and
I
he's worked in a
listen
lot
to
of
it.
TV, and
Yeah,
we were talking about just the scene choice, and with him writing for TV as well as just writing also novels, and I had brought up just Law and Order because I always find that Law and Order because they have to condense so much story into essentially 42 minutes or whatever it is. We don't see the detectives driving up to a suspect or witness's house. They're not, we don't see them knocking on the door or ringing the doorbell, introducing themselves. We're right in the apartment. The person is already answering the question that we know was asked. And so I don't
yeah,
know. That's always something that I always kind of mention to people to kind of think about when it comes to the scene choice. Because like you said, I mean, I've run into that too in the past where I always kind of feel like we need to see everything, and like we need to see everything leading up to it. And it's like, no, you don't really need to. I mean, the reader doesn't need a lot of this stuff. So yeah, that's interesting.
exactly. Yeah,
So what are you, so Shell Games just came out. What are you like, are you already contracted for something else or like, are you working on something else or
working on
what's
something else,
next for
but
you?
it's not done, and it's got a ways to go. And, I don't like to talk about work in progress because I don't know what's going to happen.
Completely understandable. Are you because like when did House on Fire? I mean, are you like a new book every 2 years writer, or like what type of schedule are you trying to, or do you not really care about kind of keeping a consistent publication schedule?
It's certainly the norm in commercial publishing in this genre. This is you have a book every year. And I did have The Cage, Her Two, and now Shell Games were in consecutive years. But House on Fire was 2019. So I had a gap there of several years left. That was Simon and Schuster. I've been with HarperCollins for the other three. And that was because I changed publishers in midstream. So there was a big delay there. And now I will not have a book in 2025 because I haven't finished it yet. So I will not meet that, publishing norm of a book a year.
So going back to Shell Games, you mentioned before about Gaslight. Can you talk about, and it's mentioned in the book, just kind of the origin of Gaslight, where that comes from? Because now it's a very ubiquitous word. Everybody essentially knows what it is. They use it all the time. It's probably almost overused a lot. But can you kind of talk about like where it originated from?
Yeah, it was a film by that title it was 80 years ago. 1944, George Cukor released this film called Gaslight, starring Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer. And I just rewatched it recently, so I'd be prepared to talk about it. And in it, she's a young bride swept off her feet by Charles Boyer's character, and he starts telling her that she's misplaced things or that she's forgotten things, or you remember, dear. And at first, it's very gentle and kind, as though he's just a concerned husband worried about his bride's absent-mindedness. But then he starts getting shrill, scolding her. How can you forget this again? And she starts to doubt, herself. And he's doing this, to manipulate her. It turns out he's a con man, and he's after her dead aunt's jewels that are hidden in the attic of this. And this is in the olden days, so they have gas lights, and the gas lights in her bedroom keep flickering, and it makes her think that she's losing her mind because why is the light flickering? Gas lights only flicker if somebody else is in the house turning a light on downstairs, then the gas will flicker. But there's nobody else in the house because Gregory, her husband, has gone off to work. Well, it turns out Gregory, her husband, isn't at work. He's upstairs in the attic of this, which used to be the aunt's house, and he's searching for her jewels. He's sure she has these hidden jewels in there. And when he turns on the gas light in the attic, that causes the light to flicker in the wife's bedroom. So that's where the term gaslight came from. People think that in the movie he was deliberately turning the gas lights, making them flicker to make her drive her insane, but that wasn't what was going on. It just happened because he was up in the attic. But it's interesting how quickly, I mean, it was a big success. It swept the Oscars that year. And in just a matter of very few years, it became part of the lexicon of gaslighting somebody. In fact, this is really funny, and you're way too young to know anything about this, but George Burns and Gracie Allen had a comedy show, and it was the first used in that idea of psychologically manipulating somebody to doubt their own reality in the Burns and Allen show. And then it just became part of our vocabulary. And now, as you said, it's ubiquitous. People use it all the time, whenever, and incorrectly lots of times, just to, if somebody disagrees with you, they're not gaslighting you. That's a different phenomenon.
Yeah, it's always interesting how certain terms or words or phrases become, like you said, part of the lexicon. Like even like the Streisand effect,
Yes.
certain things that no one really sets out. Like I'm sure that when they, who wrote and directed that movie.
George Cukor, but it was originally a stage play in London. That was where, and I've forgotten the name of the playwright, but that's where it came from. And then he adapted it for the American screen.
So yeah, I mean, probably when they were when the playwright wrote that, when they directed the movie, probably there was never any the faintest notion that
They
the
were
term
coined the
would become
term.
what it is now. It's one of those things too, where just stuff just kind of catches on, and
Yeah.
some stuff doesn't. And quite even with gaslighting, again, I feel like obviously yes, it's been around for a long time since the movie came out, but it's become much more popular in the last I don't know, 2000 since 2016, I guess. Like, has it been? I mean, it just, yeah, it's just very interesting just how certain things just survive and certain
Somebody
words and
referred me
phrases.
to TikTok, which is not a place I usually go, but apparently there's a whole school of like armchair psychologists on TikTok who talk about gaslighting in relationships. And I think it's part of this whole phenomenon of modern, dating and relationship psychoanalysis of if you're not getting along with somebody, they're gaslighting you. And just anyway, it's used all the time. And now we see another sphere in which we see it used a lot is politics, that somebody's gaslighting you by, making you think that eggs are, too costly or something.
So you don't get, at least again, I'm only about 100 some pages into it. You don't get too much into politics in here, but there is mention of Florida politics. Like, do you, I don't know, like some writers are very hesitant to get little, I mean, even because again, I'm only 100 and what, 10 pages in. I don't see anything very overly political, but there are a few things in there. Do you ever worry about getting some angry emails or reviews from people who
Actually,
just
I
are going to
already
take things
have.
out of context, where it's just like they feel like, oh, you made this little mention here, it must mean you're, this type of thing politically or whatever else.
I already have. The book's only been out 2 days, and already people have said, this was really good, but she didn't need to go into that political stuff. And it's part of the,
Yeah.
as I said, I'm a realistic writer. It's part of the realism of Florida now that there is, book banning, that there is, anti-immigrant fervor. There's all this stuff going on there. And I mean, sure, I have my own take on it, but I think I presented a realistic portrait of what's happening in Florida right now.
Yeah.
Some
Well,
people won't
again,
because they don't like it pointed out.
this is true. So yeah, so the new book is Shell Games, just came out this past Tuesday. What's today? Thursday. So just 2 days ago, just came
Yeah.
out. Where can people find it? Everywhere?
Bookshop.org, is a great source for shopping indie stores if you want to shop indie stores online. Of course, I recommend all of my own favorite indie stores, including here in Asheville, Malaprops,
Malaprops. Mhm.
Malaprops in my other hometown of Sarasota, Bookstore One Sarasota. And then my original hometown back in Pennsylvania is Main Point Books in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And all three of those are wonderful shops. I'm going to be visiting all of them. And I would really commend people to go there and buy the book.
Yeah, do you know the dates exactly for people who are in those areas if they want to try to see you live?
I'm going to be at Bookstore One Sarasota on December 6th, Friday, December 6th at 6 p.m. And the following Friday in Pennsylvania at Main Point Books in Wayne. And that's a Friday, December 13th at 7 p.m. And Malaprop's not until next spring when we get back from Florida.
Okay. And then where can people find you online if they want to follow you on social media?
BonnieKistler.com is my website. And I am Bonmot, BONMOT 101 on all the socials.
Okay, perfect. And then before you go, what is anything good I don't know, that you've enjoyed either reading or watching, or, how are you passing the time so far?
You know, just this week we started rewatching Succession, which
Mm,
is such a brilliant show. And it's one of those shows I really get more out of it on rewatching. There's so much
uh,
stuff going on. And
yeah.
so I was really enjoying that. And in terms of things I've been reading, I have to recommend a thriller I read earlier this year, which just was tremendous. Steve Kavanaugh, Kill for Me, Kill for You,
Mm.
uh, had one of the best surprises. And you probably feel this way too, Robert, when you read so much and work so much in this field, it's hard to be, so you can see what's coming because all the writerly tricks of how they're, uh, hiding this fact, and it's going to come out later. And it's disappointing when you're reading a mystery thriller if you figure it out too soon. You miss that, force of the surprise. And I have to say, Steve really surprised me with this one. It was just great.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a benefit of, writing the types of books we do and reading the types of books we do that, in theory, we take that to to heart when we're writing our own books to try to not get to a place where maybe a twist or a surprise or anything, becomes too obvious or the setup is too much of a, like, okay, we see what's going to happen here. Just to play with those expectations.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of a setup that really caught me by surprise, I have to say The Killing Room, which was
Oh, yeah.
one of the best early twists. You read a lot of books which have that twist at the end, but here where you go
So,
in thinking that a certain thing is happening to this poor man, and then to realize what's actually going on was a wonderful surprise. My husband and I both really enjoyed that.
well, thank you. So you'll appreciate this. When we were shopping it around, because basically, it's set up to be a certain type of book and then becomes a completely different type of book. But when we're shopping it around, and you know how it is with editors reading books, like they don't read the entire book. They oftentimes read a couple chapters, or they'll read the first 50 pages or whatever else. And the reveal in the Killing Room doesn't come until after part one, just because I didn't want to switch point of views at the end of part one because I thought that'd be too jarring. So, we had part one, and then at the beginning of part two, we have a third person point of view with the cops. So, and then later that is, right after that is like when the reveal comes. And you just tell by some of the rejections that we got from
They never
publishers
got
that
that
like
far.
they never got because they'd be like, oh yeah, this is very just common what we're seeing. It's like, yeah, it's meant to have a common setup or whatever. It is what it is. But no, I'm glad to hear you enjoyed it. Thank you. You're
Yes.
you're one of the few I think that actually read it, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So again, yes, the new book, Shell Games. It's in paperback right now, obviously ebook, audiobook, so people can go pick it up if they can. Are those bookstores you listed, is there any specific store that does like if people want like to order signed copies or anything? Is there any specific store that is doing signed copies currently?
No, not yet. No.
Okay,
But
but
after
once you go
there, yeah.
there, they can.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bonnie, for hanging
Thank
out. I'm
you,
sure I'll see
Robert.
you at some other, Ville place coming up.
Bill.
Um, and again, the author is Bonnie Kistler, and if you can, go check out her old stuff, the Bonnie McDougall books.
Oh,
There are three of
be hard
them.
to
So,
find.
yeah. Well, is there any idea about just having them? I guess are they still available? It looks like there's some Kindle editions available still.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that's true. And I think that Recorded Books did some audios, belatedly did audios of them too. So I guess there's still something there, but I don't think they're in print. I don't think
Did
you
you
can.
ever sign a new contract for those Kindle editions? Because those books were back in the 90s.
Yeah, yep. Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Well,
I did.
oh, that's good. Because otherwise that'd be a problem. So,
Yeah,
well, you're a
somebody.
lawyer,
No.
So, all right, everyone. Still next time. So again, thanks to Bonnie, and we'll see everyone later. Bye.
Thank you, Robert. Good night.
So anyway, I will email you a YouTube link once I put it up, probably later tonight, if not tomorrow. Yeah, we're offline. And yeah, so yeah, because I thought initially I saw there was supposed to be a hardcover of this as well, and then I looked at just last night. I'm like, oh, it's not because I know, like I know that's how publishing is. Like Blackstone didn't even do a hardcover version of like Enemy of the State, even though they essentially do print on demand. It's not like HarperCollins. HarperCollins does an actual print run. Like they actually have to warehouse these books. Blackstone just
Yeah.
does print on demand. They're still like, we're not even gonna do a hardcover. And I was like, Jesus Christ. Because at
Yeah.
least, but yeah, I mean that's just how, publishing is, unfortunately. So, but I hopefully the Scott Simon thing really kind of, pushes things because I was like, oh wow. Like yeah, I mean that's big.
No. Well, Amazon sold out on the first day. And I don't know how much to read into that because maybe they only had 10 copies on hand, but
Yeah, it's always hard to tell exactly what
yeah,
that means.
how much they ordered. But I thought, that's because of the NPR.
So are you contracted for another one or is this next one? Or I mean, like where are you at with right now? Because I know like, I don't know. Because again, publishing is so
Yeah, no,
awful.
yeah, no,
Are they
I'm not.
basically at a place now where they're like, if this book doesn't, sell X number of copies, they're not going to do another book or something?
Yeah, yeah,
They haven't
I
really.
think that HarperCollins has been waiting for a while to see if the Cage TV show is going to happen. And
Yeah.
um, I think they're,
But here's the thing, and I was having this conversation with I think it was Brian Andrews at BoucherCon, where it's like it's not like the old days where like when Shogun was turned into a NBC miniseries, it was a huge book all over the world. Like, nowadays, these books are turned into like, streaming show or a movie and just
it doesn't become the,
it
yeah,
half the time people aren't even aware that it's
that,
based
that it
on a
was a
book
book.
or anything
And
like
it's
that.
awful when they change the title as they do with
There's that, or then the publisher doesn't even really push it. Like I've had that too happen with some authors where their publisher was kind of like, hopefully people come and like they don't even like change the cover or like do like a media tie-in like they used to do that a lot, and they don't really even do that anymore. Even put one of
Now,
those little.
HarperCollins has already talked about getting the
That's
artwork
good.
happening. So
That's
no,
good.
I think they plan, which is why they've kept me on so long. I think just waiting to see if this actually happens. If it doesn't, I don't know. Can't say what's going to happen with this next book. But I'm not under contract. I don't have a deadline, which is what part of the reason why it's taking me so long to write
Mm.
this book is that I don't have any particular pressure. Or,
But I mean, I guess they get first look. Would you guys be shopping it around wide?
no, well, they have the option. So, we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see what they do with it.
First look, yeah. Yeah, I know just yeah, publishing is very I always tell like, do you know the author Paul Tremblay?
I know his name. I haven't read his work.
He had two, let's see, I mean, I've known him for a very long time. He came up in the horror field, but his first two novels were essentially these like little crime books. They were a play on like the first one was The Little Sleep. It's about a narcoleptic detective. And so it was like, there were just these two books. Holt put them out. And just they didn't do anything with him. I don't think he got paid a lot for him. And then he wrote this book called A Head Full of Ghosts, which was his breakout book. But when they were shopping it around, all these editors loved the book. But ultimately, the marketing department was like, his sales on those two books didn't do, and they just did anything. And it was on the second round of submissions to William Morrow, which I don't know how William Morrow was on the second round of submissions, but it was to Morrow, and the editor there, Jennifer Buer, I don't know. She's one of those like old time. I mean, she's been there forever, but like she really wanted the book. She really fought for the book, and now like his most recent book just hit the New York Times bestseller. You know what I mean? So it's just
That's how I know the name. Yeah.
like it happened. It's just that's the thing about publishing, where it's like like even I mean, I've had the conversation with my agent, like. I don't know if I can publish anything under my own name anymore if we go out with something, just because technically, they're going to look at black, even though it wasn't in bookstores, like, it's essentially print on demand. Like, it's like, I'm like, it'd be one thing if like, St. Martin's Press had put it out, it was in bookstores and it didn't sell. Okay. Sucks, but it is what it is. But like to be penalized for something where it's like, how am I? I don't know. It's just very, very, very frustrating because it's like,
I
what?
know.
Because it's not really based on the book. It's like, yeah, the book has to be great, but you need a lot of other factors for them to, do with whatever. And
Yeah.
it's a terrible business. I don't know. That's why I always say it's a terrible business. I don't know why anyone wants to do
Why
it,
we
but
why we do it. Because
yeah.
we have to.
So, and then you said you're going to be up here in December in Philly. I'll have to check it out. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if this, what my schedule is going to be around. If possible, maybe I'll try to swing down, but it is
That'd be
also
great.
also like a good hour and a half away or whatever. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. In the
But
winter,
uh
holiday
but anyway,
season.
yeah. But are you going to be at Thriller Fest this year?
I think so. I think I'm
Yeah.
not going to go to BoucherCon though. The idea of New Orleans in September hurricane season doesn't appeal to me after having just been through the.
If I go, I mean, I've never been to New Orleans, so like it would be kind of fun to just kind of go, I guess.
Oh, it's
The
very
one
pretty.
this last year really kind of did you like it this year? I thought it was kind of awful.
Well, I thought they were not very well organized.
No, no, it was quite a mess. It was quite
Yeah,
a mess.
yeah. The whole book sale thing was
Well, there
outrageous.
was that too, and I mean, I guess they couldn't really help it, but it was like having all the panels up top. and then
Yeah,
signings, because like,
yeah.
the majority
Oh,
of
back and forth on the
the majority
street.
of the people there are like, elderly and have to, use scooters or whatever else. So like
One
making them have to
elevator.
go up and down those elevators
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
time, it
No,
just
that
was
was bad.
very,
That was bad.
it was not
And
great.
I was really annoyed at the organizers because I sent in my photo and bio and they didn't put it in the program. And they never told me that they didn't have it to go in the program. And I thought, what's the point of being here if you're not in the program?
No, and then especially if you didn't have books, I know Rob Hart was really upset. I mean, he and a lot of other authors, I don't know, did they have any books of yours there?
None, none.
Yeah, that's I mean it's not like Thriller Fest. If they don't have any books of Thriller Fest, it's like okay, it's not a big deal because it's mostly just writers at Thriller Fest. But
Yeah,
yeah,
but
at
on
BoucherCon it's
demand.
essentially the majority are I mean, people are there to buy books. People
Readers.
are there
Yeah,
to so
yeah.
that's
Thriller Fest is going to be better this year in the new hotel where we're all on the same floor. Running back and forth the floors was a little awkward.
is it going to be I saw like it's literally just right around the same
Just,
block.
yeah, catty cornered, I think. Yeah, it's the Sheraton instead of the Hilton. So it's the same neck of the woods, but
Hmm.
the layout will be better for us, I think.
Yeah, I haven't signed up yet, but I'm gonna
I
try
haven't.
to go, if possible. But because yeah, it's always fun going there. It's just, I don't know, it's New York, it's expensive. I don't know. Like, do you fly in?
Yep.
I guess if you're going from Florida or because like at least for here from Harrisburg,
Frequently.
I just take the train, so it's usually like,
Yeah.
but like, some of these authors, like like Christina McDonald flying in from the UK, it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
Oh my goodness, it's incredible. But people, yeah, people. Well, the one that I really want to go to is not BoucherCon New Orleans, but the following year when it's in Calgary. I've never been to
Hmm.
Calgary. I've always wanted to go to that part of Canada. So I'm definitely going to go to that one. And that's going to be obviously a big trip.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that would definitely be yeah. Well, it was very nice talking. Thank you so much for making the time. I really look forward to finishing this. But yeah, I saw that thing in there because I know how stupid readers can be, and I was like, "Oh, she's making some political statements here." I
Uh-huh.
can see.
People think authors should keep their mouths shut. And I'm sorry. Sorry, can't do it.
I that was, but yeah, it was very. I was just curious if yeah, because I know that some of these, I don't
Yeah,
know,
I'm getting some blowback.
and it's
I'm,
it's so innocuous too. It's not like you know what I mean. Like it's nothing like. It's just like these little lines, and I don't
I had the
know.
thing in there about these culture wars are being fought by people who have none. And
Yes, yes, exactly. That was line that was but with the book banning part and
so, yes.
the moms of
So,
liberty and the literacy
right, right,
and
right.
oh boy. Well, at least Matt Gates bowed out, so there's
I
that.
know. I'm so happy. It was a big celebration in our
I
house.
honestly did not expect that to happen.
Me neither. I
Like
thought that
like that surprised me.
I thought
Which means that ethic report must be bad.
Oh, I know. They just said, they had paper evidence that the $10,000 that he paid, for sex. So, which is something he said he never
Oh
for
man.
sex. There they have, well, here's $10,000 you paid to these women for sex. So yeah, that was nice to see them back down on that one. And now I just saw the headline of who he's appointed now for AG, and it's this woman, Pam Bondi, who is a
Oh
Florida.
yeah, she was from Florida, right?
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. She was,
I saw someone online somewhere put something like this was like a couple days ago or a week ago. Essentially, was like it's fitting that the capstone of QAnon is that Republicans nominate a child molester or something like that as like the head law or as like attorney general or whatever else. And it's like, yeah, but they don't care. It's this as long as it's their side, they don't care.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the frustrating part. So, but anyway, all right. Well, again, congratulations on the release, and good luck with everything. And like I said, I will email you a YouTube link once I
Great.
have it up there. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Nice talking to
Yep.
you.
Bye.
Good night.